have been lighting up the night sky in the town of Vasilkiv, which lies some 40 kilometers south of the capital.
For a fortnight, Russia waged war on its neighbour. This is an oil depot near an airstrip to the south of Kiev. With toxic smoke filling the air, people have been advised to close their windows and stay indoors.
Russia hits Ukrainian oil and gas facilities in wave of attacks. Missiles hit an oil facility near Kiev and a gas pipeline in Kharkiv as Russia's invasion of Ukraine intensifies.
Russian missile hit Ukrainian oil, gas facilities. Russian forces have attacked oil and gas facilities in Ukraine, sparking huge explosions.
Columns of tanks have been seen entering the city. And horrific cell phone footage showed a tank crushing a car.
It's emerging online. These pictures here show helicopters flying on the outskirts of Kiev, which is in the east of the country. Ukrainian media reporting that they belong to Russia.
War has returned to Europe. In the early hours of Thursday, Russian tanks and troops rolled across the border in a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, just moments after their president, Vladimir Putin, announced on television he would launch a so-called special military operation. That operation's prompted a chorus of condemnation and vows to hold the Kremlin accountable. But when it comes to defending the nation under attack, NATO has made it clear Ukraine is on its own.
This 24th of February is a terrible day for Ukraine and a dark day for Europe.
It is President Putin who is bringing war back to Europe.
I'm addressing you, the Russian people, as a Ukrainian citizen. We are separated by a border stretching more than 2,000 kilometers. And right now, there are 200,000 of your soldiers there. And this could mark the start of a major war on the European continent.
One state that is responsible for what is happening now in Ukraine, and that is Russia.
The European Union and its people stand by Ukraine and its people.
There is no justification.
Stand by Ukraine and its people. And its people.
There is no justification for all this. This is Putin's war.
Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
In that war, there was big bombings and a lot of smoke and a lot of gunfire. I saw a lot of war, a lot of gunfire.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Witnessed a confrontation today at an airfield outside Kyiv. Tell us what happened and what it tells you about Ukraine's chances of keeping control of its own capital.
Yeah, I mean, it was astonishing, but it was unexpected as well, because we were making our way to an airfield near the capital, Kiev, just on the outskirts of it, that had been attacked. We knew there had been fighting there over the course of the previous hours. It's an essential airbase that the Russian special forces, we understood, had been dropped there to seize in order to establish a bridgehead so they could bring in more forces. So we went there. There was a checkpoint at the gates. I was told by Ukrainian officials that the Ukrainians had it back under control after fierce fighting. And I spent some time talking with the soldiers outside, saying, who is it that's in control right now? I said to the commanding officer in my broken Russian, and he said, it's the Russians that are in control. And I said, okay, so where are the Russians then? And he said, we're the Russians, which was incredible, because it was we thought they were Ukrainian forces. I looked at their insignia and suddenly realized that, we had stumbled upon and we'd encountered that forward group of Russian special forces that had been put into that base just a few hours before by helicopter, had engaged in fierce fighting and were now facing a counterattack from the Ukrainian military. At that point, we stepped away and witnessed this.
Keep inside, in here, against the
How
wall.
How can I find it?
Focus. Should we run that way?
We've got to be mindful for the driver as well, okay? Let's move down this way against the wall.
Down.
I need to check
Keep down, keep down, keep down.
I need you to check my feet.
It's okay, keep going.
In that war, there was big bombings and a lot of smoke.
A ruthless attack on Ukraine's second largest city. Russia accused of using cluster munitions on a residential area of Kharkiv, home to 1.5 million people, 6 hours east of Kiev, the latest onslaught of the Russian invasion. Buildings set alight, homes obliterated, missiles pepper the city, sticking out of the dirt near a playground and lodged in the kitchen in the centre of an apartment complex.
Russia's assault on Ukraine is intensifying. This is Kharkiv in the east of Ukraine. And other footage raises questions about Russia's conduct. This attack may have been a cluster bomb. They're banned by many countries, though not by Russia or Ukraine. But Boris Johnson is clear on what we're seeing.
Vladimir Putin is prepared to use barbaric and indiscriminate tactics against innocent civilians.
Ukraine has accused Russia of using thermobaric weapons, also known as vacuum bombs, during its offensive. Vacuum bombs suck oxygen in from air to produce a high-temperature explosion that can vaporize human bodies. The blast wave these bombs create lasts significantly longer than conventional explosives.
An enormous explosion in Ukraine's second city region has been captured in chilling video footage. The blast is understood to have struck Chugev airfield in the Kharkiv region. In multiple clips of the incident shared on social media, a mammoth bright orange blast wave, which hangs in the air, is seen erupting over the night sky. It comes after the Ukrainian ambassador to the US Oksana Markarova said yesterday the Kremlin had used the devastating bombs, banned by the Geneva Convention, during airstrikes. Thermobaric or vacuum explosives, dubbed the father of all bombs, suck oxygen from the surrounding air to generate high-temperature explosions. They can vaporize a human body and were first developed by the Soviet Union and the US in the 1960s.
Other Russian attacks include this in the northeastern town of Okhtyrka. Ukraine says 70 soldiers died and makes this claim.
They used the vacuum bomb today, which is actually prohibited by Geneva Convention.
Vacuum bombs ignite a fireball that sucks in all surrounding oxygen. They're a thermobaric weapon whose use is condemned by the international community. This is verified footage of an airstrike on Friday. Now the city's encircled. To hold it under siege would be a war crime. But even if a war crime has been committed, justice is a long road. It could come via the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Its prosecutor says, "I am satisfied that there's reasonable basis to believe that both alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in Ukraine."
Our goal is to protect the Russian Federation from military threats from the Western states, which are trying to use Ukrainians in the fight against our country. I would like to emphasize that we only strike military targets and only with high-precision weapons. The Ukrainian side does not shy away from using peaceful civilians as a human shield.
Over the weekend, the Russian leader putting his nuclear deterrent forces on high alert for the first time in nearly 50 years, claiming NATO countries were making aggressive statements against Russia.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has issued a chilling warning that any impending world war will become nuclear and destructive.
На выходных днях семья президента Путина
была эвакуирована в специальный бункер, подготовленный на случай ядерной войны. Этот бункер находится на территории Республики Алтай. Это на самом деле не бункер, а это целый подземный город, оборудованный по последнему слову науки и техники. Я надеюсь, вам это о чем-то говорит, если президент отправляет свою семью в этот бункер.
In that war, there was big bombings and a lot of smoke and a lot of gunfire. A lot of war, a lot of gunfire, a lot of missiles, attack helicopters, they strike aircrafts, and it was just unbelievable.
Kiev this morning is staring down the barrel of a Russian assault column that's reportedly up to 40 miles long. Satellite images confirm it's big, deadly, and dangerous, with hundreds of armored vehicles, tanks, and towed artillery, and that it's heading toward the capital of 3 million people. Russia seems to be changing tactics. So far, Russia has been using small group attacks with incursions into towns and cities, which the Ukrainian military has been able to repel with brave and determined resistance. What's coming looks more like old, blunt Russian siege warfare. It's already happening outside of Kiev, with Russian forces attacking Mariupol in the south, home to 500,000 people, with tragic consequences and disturbing images emerging.
Satellite images show a Russian military convoy getting closer to Kyiv from the north. The head of the convoy most recently observed at an airport fewer than 20 miles from the city center.
Yeah, very sobering images that are coming out this morning, giving an indication of the might of the Russian forces that are amassed just north of the capital, Kiev, and still heading down there. Those images show what we believe was a main armoured division yesterday that was certainly a few miles long. It's now put at more than 40 miles long.
The fighter aircrafts,
Hata hivyo niliona zile ndege za kivita,
those Alpha Strike aircraft, they're called Alpha Strike aircrafts.
zile ndege speciali kabisa za kivita,
The ones that strike, they go fast into the enemy territory.
zile ambazo zinapiga zinaenda kwa haraka kabisa katika eneo la adui.
Even those pilots, they go on what we call suicidal missions.
Hata wale marubani wanaenda katika misheni ambazo zinaitwa misheni za kujiua.
Because they are the ones who go normally and knock down the anti-aircraft missiles and all of them, the batteries, wherever they are. First of all, disarm them, knock them down.
Kwa sababu hao ndio ambao wanaenda na kutegua yale makombora ya kivita.
The anti-aircraft missiles and the batteries, wherever they are located, they are the ones that know them and they go and knock them out first before the other fleet now come.
Zile wao ndio ambao wanategua zile ndege ambazo ni za makombora. Hao ndio ambao wanaenda na kuzitegua kabisa kabla zije.
This is an ABC News special report.
Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the largest invasion of a neighboring country in Europe since World War II. The Russian military attacking from the south, the north, the east, taking out military installations and moving closer tonight on strategic cities.
We saw fighter jets flying over the city this morning as emergency air raid sirens wailed.
the special operation forces in attack, the strike helicopters going also.
Halafu nikaenda zile ndege speciali kabisa katika vikosi, zile helikopta za kulipua.
Warzone. Дом летает, охраняет, как комаров.
And they were saying, no, because they speak our language. Those people in that area speak our language. Those people in that area, they live like this, like us. They speak our language.
I would like to reiterate that Ukraine is just not our neighboring country. It's an integral part of our own history, culture, and spiritual space. Ukraine, from the beginning and in its totality, has been created by Russia.
In a lengthy televised address, a visibly angry Putin described Ukraine as an integral part of Russia's history, calling eastern Ukraine ancient Russian land, and said he was confident the Russian people would support his decision.
Putin carved up Ukraine, which he described as a long-lost piece of Russia. Let me emphasize once again that Ukraine for us is not just a neighboring country. It is an integral part of our own history, culture, and spiritual space, he said. These are our comrades and relatives.
We've seen Russia's attempts to change the borders of another sovereign country by force. What President Putin has said loudly and clearly, and is now demonstrated by the actions that Russia has taken, is that what this is about for him is Ukraine being absorbed in one fashion or another into Russia. He sees Ukraine as having no independent existence. He wants to reincorporate it into an empire.
So I see a territorial dispute that is coming. I see the UN involvement.
An emergency meeting called at Kiev's request. Members of the UN Security Council condemned Russia's move to recognize independence of breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. In doing so, the US said Vladimir Putin had torn the Minsk agreement to shreds.
The UN Security Council convened for an emergency meeting in New York last night.
Announced by several council members, including U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield.
He calls them peacekeepers. This is nonsense. We know what they really are. This move by President Putin is clearly the basis for Russia's attempt to create a pretext for a further invasion of Ukraine.
It's too late, my dear colleagues, to speak about de-escalation. Too late. The Russian president declared a war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? Ambassador, shall I do that right now, or you can confirm it? Do not interrupt me, please. Thank you.
Then don't ask me questions when you are speaking. Proceed with your statement.
Anyway, you declared the war. It is the responsibility of this body to stop the war. So I call on every one of you to do everything possible to stop the war.
We are seeing the greatest massing of troops, of missiles, of artillery, and of aircraft capability since 1945. It's clear that the Russian Federation's actions directly threaten this sovereignty, this territorial integrity of Ukraine. We all, each and every one of us, has an obligation to uphold the territorial integrity of other states, to oppose invasions, and to insist on the peaceful resolution of disputes.
Russia's actions are an unprovoked violation of international law, of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and a direct contradiction of the Minsk agreements. Russia's aggression not only threatens all of Ukraine, but every member state and the UN itself. Unfortunately, the fake reality Russia wants to create is already having real consequences for the people of Ukraine and for the world. To date, Russia's war in eastern Ukraine has already killed more than 14,000 people. Nearly 3 million Ukrainians, half of whom are elderly people and children, need food, shelter, and other life-saving assistance. And of course, ordinary Russians should be asking how many Russian lives Putin is willing to sacrifice to feed his ambitions. If Russia continues down this path, it could, according to our estimates, create a new refugee crisis, one of the largest facing the world today, with as many as 5 million more people displaced by Russia's war of choice and putting pressure on Ukraine's neighbors. What we can do together today is make clear that Russia will pay an even steeper price if it continues this aggression.
The United Nations Security Council emergency session made it clear that Russia is waging this war on its own.
Russia is isolated. It has no support for the invasion of Ukraine.
President Putin chose to drop bombs on Kyiv, to force families to stuff their lives into backpacks and shelter in subway stations.
But Russia vetoed a demand to immediately withdraw all troops. The measure will now be taken to the full 193-member General Assembly, where only a simple majority is needed to pass.
A special emergency session of the UN General Assembly. All 193 member states will have the opportunity to express their views on the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
The United Nations General Assembly session witnessed it was the first such session in 40 years, a rare emergency session, only the 11th in United Nations history. It opened with the members observing a minute of silence for Ukraine.
Although Russian strikes are reportedly largely targeting Ukrainian military facilities,
We have credible accounts of residential buildings, critical civilian infrastructure, and other non-military targets sustaining heavy damage. This escalating violence, which is resulting in civilian deaths, including children, is totally unacceptable. Enough is enough.
The Ukrainian ambassador accused Russia of killing hundreds of Ukrainians. The ambassador added that Russia is mounting an offensive while negotiations were still underway. Ukraine also called Russia's nuclear alert threat madness, quote unquote.
President Zelensky today addressed an emergency session of the European Parliament.
We are fighting just for our land and for our freedom, despite the fact that all large cities of our country are now blocked. Nobody is going to enter and intervene with our freedom and country. And believe you me, every square of today, no matter what it's called, it's going to be called, as today, Freedom Square in every city of our country. Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians. I'm happy that we have unified today, all of you, all the countries of the European Union. But I did not know, but this is the price they will have to pay. And it's a tragedy for me, a tragedy for every Ukrainian, tragedy for our state. I mean, this high price, very high price. Thousands of people who were killed. 2 revolutions, 1 war. And 5 days of full-scale invasion.
He received a standing ovation. Compare that response to this. There was a mass walkout from the United Nations Human Rights Council during a speech by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, during which he seemed to give a new justification for the invasion of Ukraine.
Today, the dangers that Zelensky's regime poses to neighboring countries and international security in general have increased significantly after the authorities based in Kyiv started playing
UN has to take a very strong stance in defense of its own principles, of the UN Charter, because what Russia did to Ukraine is an attack on the UN foundations, on the foundations of our cooperation. It's an attack on all 192 except Russia.
Ukrainian women and Ukrainian children are in deep fear because of bombs and missiles which are going from the sky. And Ukrainian people are desperately asking for the West to protect our sky. We are asking for the no-fly zone. We are saying in response that it will trigger World War III. But what is the alternative, Mr. Prime Minister? To observe how our children are, instead of planes, are protecting NATO from the missiles and bombs? What's the alternative for the no-fly zone? We have planes here. We have air defense system in Poland, in Romania. NATO has this air defense. At least this air defense could shield the Western Ukraine. NATO is not willing to defend because NATO is afraid of the World War III, but it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister, but Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't have where to run. Well, this is what is happening, Prime Minister.
Look, I just want to say that I'm acutely conscious that there is not enough that we can do as the UK government to help in the way that you want. And I've got to be honest about that. And when you talk about the no-fly zone, as I said to Volodymyr Zelensky, I think a couple of times, unfortunately, the implication of that is that the UK would be engaged in shooting down Russian planes would be engaged in direct combat with Russia. That's not something that we can do or that we've envisaged. And I think the consequences of that would be truly very, very difficult to control.
A lot of people running and being refugees, pouring their things out into a refugee camp, and they were looking for food, opening cans and eating old soup and whatever. It was such a situation.
In just 7 days, 1 million people have fled Ukraine, uprooted by this senseless war. I have worked in refugee emergencies for almost 40 years, and rarely have I seen an exodus as rapid as this one. Hour by hour, minute by minute, more people are fleeing the terrifying reality of violence. Countless have been displaced inside the country. And unless there is an immediate end to the conflict, millions more are likely to be forced to flee Ukraine. Inside Ukraine, our staff and other humanitarians are working where and when they can, in frightening conditions. The response from governments and local communities in receiving this 1 million refugees has been remarkable.
UN Refugee Agency now saying 1 million people have fled Ukraine since the fighting began last week.
1 million refugees, it's a number that's hard to comprehend, but we're seeing just a sliver of it right here. These people are all here at the Lviv train station waiting for buses to take them to Poland. You can see the Red Cross tents right here. They're giving out food, they're giving out water. Beyond is the train station. Every train in this country heading westward is now for refugees only, no tickets necessary. And this is just the beginning. The UN is now talking about 4 million refugees in total in European countries. And internally, they're talking about 12 million people inside Ukraine who are not going to be able to get out, who are going to need humanitarian assistance, relief, and protection.
Let's turn now to the humanitarian crisis, which has spiked to more than 1 million refugees in just 7 days. Today, there was little movement on a ceasefire, but both sides say they did agree on a humanitarian corridor for civilians to leave Ukraine safely.
The strong do what they can, while the weak suffer what they must. Of the 1 million refugees who have already fled into neighboring countries, 500,000 of them are children, the UN says. And yet they are the lucky ones. Ukraine says more than 2,000 civilians are confirmed dead, though the real toll could be much higher and only the beginning.
Poland already expects that maybe 1 million Ukrainian refugees might seek shelter in their country after this Russian invasion in that now war-torn country. And we started to see this as soon as the sun rose in Ukraine this morning. Cars lined up on highways of large Ukrainian cities like Kyiv, bumper-to-bumper traffic as people escape another large city, Odessa, in Ukraine's south, heading to surrounding countries like Poland, Romania, and Moldova. All this after intense bombing overnight in some of those same cities as Russia began its invasion. Hundreds of people took shelter in a subway, really making it a makeshift bomb shelter, taking shelter from those explosions. The Red Cross and the UN's refugee agency saying that they are prepared to help the people trying to flee.
Arriving in neighboring countries with little more than a suitcase. In Romania, in Moldova, where they've built a tent city, women and children finally safe, with a warm meal, a place to rest. But as the waves of refugees keep coming, a flood of kindness. Hundreds of volunteers handing out soup, offering rides, and a place to stay.
Still, aid organizations say thousands have crossed borders to Romania and Moldova.
Take a look at this video of people appearing to pack what they can, leave via bus, train, or car.
In their thousands, they descended on the central railway station, trying to get seats on any train heading south. Guards firing into the air, trying to maintain order. It rarely works with people already traumatized. It was chaotic and desperate, but that is what it's like here now. The fear of the unknown is what's so difficult for the people. Ukraine is holding its breath while the world watches on.
Neighboring countries, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Germany, Romania, the Czech Republic, they are all prepared to help those refugees.
Of people running and being refugees, pouring their things out into a refugee camp, and they were looking for food, opening cans and eating old soup and whatever. It was such a situation. Opening cans and eating old soup and whatever. It was such a situation.
This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion. Despite its litany of lies, denials and disinformation, the Kremlin's intentions are clear for the world to see.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, so I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law, and it demands a firm response from the international community.
President Putin launched the greatest threat to European stability since World War II.
History will judge President Putin as harshly as the world condemns him today. Today, he cements his place in the ranks of the reviled European dictators.
Innumerable missiles and bombs have been raining down on an entirely innocent population. A vast invasion is underway.
We condemn this barbaric attack and the cynical arguments to justify it. It is President Putin who is bringing war back to Europe.
Messiah is coming, blessed people. May you be wise. May your wisdom not fail you on this one. Because remember, eternity is a very long time. Life on this earth is being dismantled. On every occasion when I come before you and speak, you the nations of the earth, you should rush and repent. Run and kneel down and repent and receive Christ and be holy and prepare. Life on the earth, essentially the Lord is saying he has brought the entire earth under the jurisdiction of the words of the tongue of his two prophets. That is very clear now. This should cause you to take gravity at my words and begin to repent and prepare for the coming of the Messiah. Everything that needs to be spoken, everything that ought to be spoken in preparing the way for the glorious coming of the Messiah, I have spoken. And I've been faithful to speak exactly as God the Father has instructed. May those who have ears repent and prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah. Thank you. Thank you indeed. The Lord bless you.